Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Maggie. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am good. I am. Hmm. Let me share my application. Really quick question for you.
Yeah.
When it's time to start, do you introduce me or, and I forgot to ask this.
Yes, I will. I will introduce you. Yes. Have your bio pulled up right already on my screen.
Okay. Let me go back to my PowerPoint.
And just also to like reconfirm, you just have these three polls that you want, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Oh,
perfect. I have those pulled up too. So just want to make sure.
Hmm.
Um,
Let me stop sharing. Uh-oh.
are you able to stop sharing or no? Okay.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. It looks like it went through.
Let me try and share again. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. It's saying stop sharing.
So here, let me.
Oh, wait.
So you're going to want to make sure that I know like it's weird. So once you put it into like this read view, it won't show up as read view if you've already shared the screen.
Oh,
Not really sure why that happens. So you're going to want to hit the share button again and then share the read view screen.
so don't put it into read view or put it into read view now.
Yeah, and then share that application window. We're not really sure why that happens. The guy that our technical technician from Hopen's not really sure why that happens either. But at least we figured it out earlier than later.
No worries. At least we're figuring it out.
Exactly.
But it's not. Why is it showing my whole screen?
Are you just sharing the application window here, or are you sharing your whole screen?
I thought I was. Just the application. Screen, application. Try it again.
There we go. Okay. I just wanted you to do it more than once, you know?
Perfect.
So how have you been? I was gonna say we have like another like minute or so before people start coming in here from lunch. They're all like in the community rooms and stuff.
Yeah. It's been going really well. How has this been going? I've been thinking about you over the last 24 hours and
I appreciate that. I was really nervous yesterday, but honestly, it's going a lot better than I thought it was going to go like off the bat. So we're really happy about that. We've consistently been having about like anywhere like up to like 50 to 60 people throughout like the afternoon sessions, which is really nice. Just because so many people have classes and stuff still, because it's spring break for the East Coast, but week 2 of classes in the UC schools.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
But 50 to 60 throughout the afternoon sessions is phenomenal. Just from like having like doing this for a living, that's really good numbers.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah, we had a really good turnout yesterday morning for the keynote and everything too. We were just under, I think it was like 150 or so. So like we had some good numbers. And I was like, all right, it's starting off okay.
I love it. That's awesome.
I'm just typing in the event chat. Oh, Sarah did it for me. Thank you, Sarah, because I'm assuming you're the other person watching us right now. Yes, it is. She's very on top of it. Sarah's like my right-hand man. Could not do this without Sarah at this point. Going back and forth with me everywhere.
I love that.
So let's just give everybody like a minute to head in here. I see that somebody else is a few other people have just joined us. And then at like 1:03, I'll read your introduction. Just, pick a time on the side. Hello, everyone. We're going to be starting in just a minute. So if you just want to take a look at the community guidelines that Sarah has posted in the chat, we do ask that you respect our speaker. They're giving us their time today, so please do not try to share your audio and your visual during their talk. It's distracting and it's disrespectful. And we also ask that you refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior in speech in the chat. Please do not take any photos during this session and try to distribute them. And conference staff will be reaching out to you individually if you do so to remove you from the session. So please don't do that. So let me introduce Stacy. You're really in for a treat today with this session. So Stacy Henry is the owner and founder of Center Branch, a people-centered leadership business dedicated to helping both companies and individuals perform to their highest potential. With services that include keynote speaking and workshop facilitation, women's development and leadership, and executive coaching. Center Branch enables people to be their best so they and the companies they work for may flourish. Stacy brings 25 years of experience to Center Branch from a variety of global industries as an executive coach, an HR business partner for C-suite leaders. In 2020, Stacy worked directly with the Chief Financial Officer, Chief Communications Officer, and Head of Strategic Development at Collins Aerospace when it merged with Raytheon Technologies. Prior to founding Center Branch, she was the head HR partner for the central functions at Collins Aerospace, a Raytheon Technologies company. So without further ado, here is Stacy.
Thank you so much, Maggie. It is my pleasure and my honor to be with all of you today. Thank you for spending a little bit of your afternoon with me. And as Maggie mentioned, I'm the owner for Center Branch, and our philosophy at Center Branch is growing great leaders. And we think about leaders at all levels. And so regardless of whether you are just starting out in your career, whether you're still a student or whether you're in the C-suite, leaders vary across the spectrum. And our whole job at Center Branch is to really grow great leaders. And we start with getting people rooted in the right values. So I appreciate all of your time today as we dive into a look at how do we get rooted. So recently, I had the privilege of writing and publishing a book. And the book is called Get Rooted, Growing People and Companies Through Change. Now, I started this book last January, so January 2020, pre-COVID. And I thought it was going to go one way, and that shifted dramatically as the change of COVID started to happen. And so you're going to hear me refer to that throughout the course of our conversation. I had to take the advice that's in the book and really root myself to grow myself through the changes that we were experiencing, both from a society perspective as well as an organizational perspective, and even from the perspective of getting this book written. Now you're going to notice on the screen, there are a bunch of quotes, and we're going to talk about these quotes. In my role, both corporately, so when I was in a corporate environment, as well as a business owner, a big chunk of my time is spent coaching and developing leaders. One of the most common things that I coach about, or that people ask me about, or individuals seek assistance on, is really how to manage through change. Over the course of the last 20 years, these are some of the most common things that I have heard. People will say, I didn't have a choice about insert ... I didn't have a choice about whatever it was. I hear things like, the choices are hard, but they're the right ones. Conversely, I have heard they, the proverbial they, are making the wrong decisions. As I've interviewed people and as I've had coaching conversations in, again, across all spectrums of the organization, I've heard things like, we've always done it this way. And I've heard, there has to be a new way. I've heard change is terrible. I've heard change is refreshing. Really very common, I have heard the statement, I have no control over ... and insert whatever change is happening. And then lastly, I have heard time and time again, it's just easier to go with the flow. Now, these are some of the most common statements that I personally have heard from entry-level employees all the way through our C-suite leaders in a variety of organizations. And that actually started this idea of Get Rooted, the book. And so I mentioned to you, I started it last year, and I started the book for two reasons. Number one, I wanted a response to help people really realize they do have a choice in change. Choices are hard, but they can make what is best for them. And so that's the behind the scenes look at really what prompted the conversation about writing a book about change, and is the basis for the conversation that we are going to have today. Now, before we dive much further into the details, as Maggie had mentioned, she and Sarah are here to help out. So if you have questions or there are comments that you'd like to make, please put those in the chat and we will respond accordingly. So with all of this, with all of these statements, the I didn't have a choice all the way through, it's easier to go with the flow, and the myriad of statements in the middle, one thing is certain, and that is change is inevitable. Change is inevitable. In any given moment, we have two options. We can step forward into growth, or we can step back into safety. This is one of my absolute favorite quotes. I actually have it on my computer screen, and it's a good reminder to me that I have a choice. I have a choice in what I do. We may not have a choice, and we may not choose the change, right? So we may not actually choose the change. For example, I just mentioned COVID. I didn't pick COVID. You didn't pick COVID. The world didn't pick COVID. We didn't choose that change. It was a change in every facet. What we do have a choice in, though, is how we show up. It's how we respond to that change and what we do with that once it either happens to us or we select it. If you think about the course of your life and you think about the changes that have happened to you or around you, I'd ask you to think about, did you choose most of those changes? Have you gone through any kind of period where You didn't experience any change. Now, each person is going to have a different response to that question. And that's just a personal question and it's a personal answer. I would suspect, though, that every single one of us have gone through change because we know that it's inevitable. More often than not, we don't choose the change. And here's where I would ask you to think about yourselves. Once that change happened, what did you do with it? What choice did you make after that? And that is really where we will spend a big chunk of our time today, is talking about that. Now, your first choice, as I just alluded to, when it comes to change, is do I hold on to the past or do I embrace that change? So when change happens, whatever it may be, do I hold on to the past? Do I make statements like, well, we've always done it this way? Or it's easier just to kind of do what we've always done? Or do I embrace the change and do I make statements either to myself in my head or to other people that reflect, okay, we're going to go with this change? That's your very first choice when it comes to change. Now we're going to dive deeper into which is better and how do you make the choice between one or the other. The which is better is a personal choice. My personal choice is embrace change. And I would say to everybody that's watching and listening, embracing change is the better choice. It is not the easier choice. And I want to be really, really clear with that. Holding on to the past when any kind of change occurs, and it could be a change in where you live, it could be a change in relationship, a change in job, a change in professor, a change in anything, a worldwide pandemic at the grandest scales. The easiest choice, the one that 90-some%, and I just read a study that it was 97% of people select, is to hold on to the past. And we as humans do that because it's known, it's what we've always done, it's comfortable. It might not be the best choice. It might not be the right choice, but it's the known choice, and that feels comfortable for us. So if you find yourself in the holding on to the past category, I want you to know you're in the majority. And I'm going to offer you today some alternatives to that. Embracing the change is by far the harder choice, by far. I often equate embracing change to hugging a cactus. And if you can see me on the video, I'm literally hugging. And if you can imagine a cactus, that's a little prickly. Who would want to hug a cactus? It doesn't feel good. It's not going to be the easiest choice in the very beginning, and it's going to feel very uncomfortable. Now, the good news is that the cactus needles are tiny, and they're really not going to give us too much of an abrasion. Now, before we move on, if you are able to, I would love to know from your perspective. So if you can put in the chat feature, what do you see behind the word change? That blue area behind the word change. What do you see? Just type in that chat area. What do you see in that blue area? And I'm curious what we're going to see here. Okay, so Hannah saying blue textured plastic. Anybody else? What do you see there? Sparkles, okay. Tiny crystals. All right, each of us is going to see something different? Here's the real answer. I have no idea. I have no idea what is in that background of the word change. The reason that I ask you, and some of the responses that I have received in the past are things like sandpaper, grit, sparkles, crystals. I have heard, plastic as well. All of that is to say, how you answered that question might be indicative of how you first think about change and what is your first choice. Do you view it as sparkles and something that you can move forward with? Do you view it as sandpaper and something that might be abrasive? There's no right or wrong answer here. And I want to make sure everybody knows that. But it is perspective. And I offer you that your perspective on what you see may indicate your first choice when it comes to change. So let's take a look at embracing change versus holding on to the past. I mentioned that this is our very first choice. Now, those leaders, and again, a leader can be a leader of self at any level, whether or not you're in an organization, whether or not you're working or even in school. Anybody that leads themselves, I consider a leader. Anybody who embraces change often will embrace values-driven leadership. When we think about embracing change, we think about what are the values that will drive me and drive my actions and mindset during change. Those who embrace change versus holding on to the past will often get uncomfortable. They'll often say, okay, this is kind of like a cactus moment here. It doesn't feel great, but I'm going to do it. In order to do that, though, one of the very first things that we all have to do is identify what is our root system. What are our values that will enable us to grow through change? And we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. The other part of this is that those who embrace change versus holding on to the past must actively participate. This is not a spectator sport where I'm going to watch the change happen. If that's the case, I'm probably on the holding on to the past side. To actively participate in embracing change means I am making decisions and creating actions for myself and others. So in order to put this to action, I'm a big proponent of how do we make this real life? How do we actually make this happen when we think about our lives? The very first thing is to answer the question, how has holding on to the past versus embracing change impacted you personally and your ability to move forward or to progress in whatever? Have you found yourself impacted? Have you found yourself stalled? Have you found yourself unable to move forward as quickly as you'd like to? If so, are you embracing change or holding on to the past? And how has that impacted you? I'm also a very big proponent of looking around at my network and seeing who has traits or characteristics that I admire. So I would offer you that maybe an option for you to put this to practice is to think about someone who seems to embody embracing change and ask them for a few tips on how do they embrace change. Number one, they will feel flattered. Number two, you're probably going to get some really great tips. Make a list of the values that keep you personally holding on to the past versus embracing the change. And if there are values that are not serving you, you might want to cross them out and think about what else you may replace them with. And then one that I do often, because while I mentioned a few minutes ago that I embrace change, I was not always that way. I used to be the one to say, wait, we used to do it this way, or it used to be like this. So I'm actively participating. By each week, I write down one small change that I can embrace in my personal life. I keep it handy and I reread it a couple of times throughout the week. Sometimes, depending on the small change that I'm trying to embrace, I might have to read it a couple of times a day. But keeping that handy, either in your phone or in a notebook or somewhere handy, and going back to it helps us to process and think differently and then slowly embrace that change. So I would offer you that these are simply 4 actions that you can take to move from holding on to the past to embracing change, should that be your first choice. Okay. So we do have a poll. So if you go to the polls tab and participate in our first poll as it relates to holding on to the past versus embracing change, I'm going to ask you to rank yourself on a scale. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I'm fully holding on to that past, or 10 being I'm fully embracing change, where do you fit? Where you fall in that? And I'm going to answer it honestly for myself as well. I'm going to say I'm an 8, and it looks like, okay, we have a range. So we don't have anybody whose heels are stuck in the mud at, you know, I'm fully holding on to the past, and we have a good range of, I'm kind of somewhere in that middle area where I'm not 100% ready to move over to the embracing change to I'm close. I'm close. I'm at an 80%. So this is a good gauge for you. You might want to ask yourself this on a monthly basis. Where am I in that very first choice that I get to make about change? Am I holding on to the past, or am I embracing change? Okay. Now, I had mentioned that as I started to write the book, I also had other values that I wanted to write about to help people get rooted. And we're going to take a look at the 8 universal roots in Get Rooted. Now, roots are another way of saying values. What are the 8 universal values in the book Get Rooted? Number 1, love versus conflict. Relationship versus disengagement. We have trust versus control. Integrity versus dishonesty. Service versus selfishness. Joy versus complacency. Spirituality versus nothingness, what I call nothingness. And then progress versus perfection. By no means am I suggesting that these are the only roots or only values that we should practice. And by no means am I saying that this is the only 8, these are the only 8 that I see in leaders. What I am saying is that over the course of the last 25 years, you know, in my conversations and in, you know, my positions, I've had many leadership development and executive coaching positions. These are the most common. So these are the most universal and the most common roots or values that I see both individually as well as within organizations. Now you'll notice that there's a dichotomy. It's a versus. Love versus conflict. Relationship versus disengagement. And that's on purpose. Usually what we see is that if one is missing, the other is present. Not always. There is a pendulum, but often we see if a person is rooted in trust, there are generally no control issues. Conversely, if a person or a company or an organization is rooted in control, there's often a lack of the value of trust. And so the dichotomy is usually we see one very evidently, and then we see the missing component on the other side. Okay? So we're not going to go through all 8 of these. If you want to read all 8, I'll give you at the end a way that you can get the book and read all of them. But we are going to take a deeper dive into a few of these. And we're going to take a look first at trust. Now, I had mentioned the dichotomy, trust versus control. We start with trust because this is really one of the most common roots that I see either missing or has an area of opportunity to be strengthened. So we're going to dive into how do we take a look at trust versus control. So when we're choosing trust versus control, again, it's an active choice. Most people aren't going to wake up and say, I choose control today. It's not going to show up like that. Wouldn't it be great if it did? Because then we could address it from a head-on perspective. What we often will see in the root of control versus the root of trust are actions that show up in us as individuals. So when we think about a root of control, when that's the stronger value, we're going to see things like micromanagement. It could be that you might want to take the lead position in a teaming environment. It might be that you are the one directing potentially the actions of others. It might look like micromanagement of yourself, of your own personal time. Do you have to-do lists over to-do lists over to-do lists? Do you tend to get frustrated when things don't go the way that you expect them to go or the way that you have set out? Now, none of these are negative statements. These are all things that, as I say them, I'm reflecting back on my own career, and these are 150% things that I've done. You know, and one of the reasons why is that I had always thought that control was a superpower. Now, I wouldn't actually say that I love control and it's a superpower. What it did was it gave me the root of control versus the root of trust, gave me this sense of stability, and it gave me a sense of security. If I can control all of the activities, either in my personal, professional, educational life, whatever it may be, if I can control the outcomes and how things happen, I can manage that better. Many of us probably feel the same way. The challenge with that is that it's not accurate, because the minute something goes off the rails, or the minute that something tends to go a different way than we expected, our growth, our personal growth, is stifled. Often we'll have a reaction. Often we'll have a reaction. Sometimes it's not an outward reaction. Sometimes it's just a mental reaction. And I want you to know that most people are rooted in control. And I'm going to offer you that trust can 1,000,000%, and you'll notice throughout the rest of this conversation, I can be dramatic. I'm kidding when I say 1,000,000%. Trust can be learned. 100% can be learned. We're going to talk about how. The first is evaluating your say-do ratio. This is something I made up. I'm really proud of my say-do ratio, meaning, are we doing what we are saying, and vice versa? This should be a 50-50 pendulum, a 50-50 scale at all times. Here's what it looks like when it's not 50-50. I say to my team, you do this project, I trust you, they turn it in, and I redo the work. My say-do ratio is off because I said I trust them to do it, they turn it in, it's not to my standard, I redo it. Or I say, here's what I expect, and I give them parameters, like a little box. And then I expand the box and I forget to mention it. My say-do ratio is off. All of these things, by the way, are things that I have done and or said. I came up with say-do ratio because I had an employee who stopped doing great work. And I had a performance discussion with this employee, and she had the leadership courage to say to me, Stacy, why would I do great work when every single time I hand in what I think is really good work and you redo it to your specifications anyway? Now, that was a really hard piece of feedback for me to hear. And it was exactly what I needed to hear, because she followed up with that by saying, you don't trust me. And my first response was, of course I trust you. And she said, no, because if you trusted me, you wouldn't redo my work, or you would tell me what you wanted changed and allow me the opportunity to do it. That is one of the dangers of control. So it really was an in my face kind of moment where I'm very thankful that she had the courage to tell me. And it was like cactus moment, and I had a choice to make. So I had to learn to extend trust. One of the other ways that you can put this to action is really to think about a time when someone trusted you to do something. Maybe you weren't equipped, or you weren't ready to do it, or you didn't feel equipped or ready. And they gave you that chance anyway, or they gave you the resources and the help or whatever it was that you needed. What impact did that have on you? And how can you extend that same trust to somebody else? And it doesn't have to be in just a work situation. This applies to our whole integrated life, our personal, our academic, our professional lives. Now, the last point here on trust versus control is controversial if you don't want to know the answer. So ask your coworkers, ask your classmates, ask your loved ones if they think that you have micromanager or control tendencies. You might want to offer them that they can be honest with you, because this is a loaded question. Some people don't know, can I really be honest with this answer? If somebody asked me that, I would walk cautiously. Now, having said that, if somebody came to me and said, hey, I'm seeking feedback for my own personal development and really trying to figure out my value system here. And I want to figure out if I'm rooted in the value of control versus the value of trust. Where do you think I fall? Do I tend to have micromanager tendencies? When you ask it that way, oftentimes people will be willing to answer the question. Now, I jokingly say, don't ask the question if you're not really ready for the answer. I did this. I wasn't really ready for the answer, and I got a whole lot of feedback that served me well, but I took it hard. So when we think of trust versus control, I actually start with this value because this is the one that I work through the most with all of my coaching clients, and I have worked with the most over the course of the 25 years. Now we have another poll on this one. And so if we think about trust versus control, I'm going to ask you, what action might you need to work on? So if we go to our polls tab, What trust versus control action do you need to work on? Is it your say-do ratio? Is it your micromanagement tendencies? Is it extending trust to others? Or is it nothing? You're trust all the way, all day long. And I'm going to be honest and say mine is extending trust to others. Okay. So when we're looking at the poll results here, we have a couple of people with the say-do ratio. Oh, we're still getting some answers in here. A couple of micromanagement, extending trust. Okay. There's quite a range here. So looks like we're tied with the say-do ratio and the extending trust to others. Oh, now we're tied the whole way. Let's see. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so. If anybody else wants to jump in. All right. So we are 33.3 across the board. So now you know individually some of the areas that you want to work on first. I didn't really mention the extending trust to others. This is something that requires every single day planning and action. And I will just offer you that if extending trust to others is something that you want to work on, you might want to write out on a daily basis a person or a project that you want to extend trust on. And so you might say, I'm going to extend trust to insert person, on insert whatever it is, and then stick to that. And it can be small. Starting out small is good. Small wins are fantastic. Okay. All right. So thank you for participating in the poll. It looks like as we just wrapped that one up, it looks like we had 4 votes on micromanagement. Ding, ding, ding. That was a big one for me in my early career. So thank you for your honesty on all of that. So we're going to switch over to one of my absolute favorite roots or favorite values, and that is integrity. Now, if you remember the dichotomy, integrity versus dishonesty, people don't wake up, just like they don't wake up and say, I think I'm going to choose control. They also don't wake up, get out of bed, put their clothes on and say, I think today I'm going to choose dishonesty. Often, most often, this is a value or a root that shifts slowly over time. Most people, I'm giving a wide swag here, most people start out with the root of integrity. And that shifts over time based on circumstance. Okay, so we're going to talk about how do we put this into action. And what does it look like when we're not in integrity? So when we're rooting in integrity, and I purposely put rooting in integrity versus not, and left out the versus part of this, because I don't think that there is anybody that I would be talking to who would actively say, I'm going to choose dishonesty. Okay. What I am going to talk about with this is that when we are strengthening our root of integrity and when we are choosing integrity, there are specific actions that you can take and there are impacts that affect this. First and foremost, fear impacts integrity. What do I mean by that? Oftentimes, people will not show up with full integrity, meaning they might not say something. If they see something, they might not say something. They might look past something. In a work environment, they may, what I call, choose to look the other way. They may say, it's not affecting me personally, so I'm not going to do anything about it. The underlying theme there often is fear. Now, this isn't something that I say for any other reason than to bring awareness and light to the fact that if you've ever found yourself in a situation where you've seen something and not said, or you've been in a similar situation, or you've watched from the side, ask yourselves, have you or has the situation had an undercurrent of fear? The answer is maybe. It's likely maybe. When we're rooting in integrity, we really have to get very, very clear with what is our moral compass. Which way is north for us? And how do we always stay north? And if we start to go northeast or northwest, what's pulling us? And how do we come back to north? Integrity requires transparency, and I like to think of integrity as your line in the sand. Like, what is your line in the sand? I have had that line in the sand, and I have watched in different positions, in different jobs, the waves come up, wash over that line in the sand. And then as I try and redraw, it will never be redrawn in the same spot. So this is one where you really have to get crystal clear with yourself. What is my line in the sand? And what happens? Now, if you notice in the putting it to action, what I'm really talking about is that second bullet point. So one of the things that you can do is draw a line on a piece of paper and label it. Label it with something that you feel a strong integrity about. And this can be your, air quote, line in the sand. Now, if you think about every time you have moved or adjusted or changed that line in the sand, I want you to cross out your line and redraw that line. And then the work really starts to happen when you ask yourself, why? Why? And I'll give you a personal example. Now, this comes from my personal life, from a relationship that I was in. My line in the sand was that the person needed to treat me with respect. Seems like a pretty easy line in the sand. And for most people, it is. And then every time that this individual would say something negative or make fun of me, that would be that wave coming and crashing over that line in the sand. So I would redraw the line. It would be in a different place. And I would say things to myself like, well, I'm sure they didn't mean it. Well, I'm sure they had a bad day. And then the next time that something would happen, or I would get another negative comment, or the person would say, Stace, you're behind. And I'm being very polite when I say this. Your behind is so big, I can't believe you're able to get up the stairs. It was said a little differently, but for the sake of our webinar, that's how it was said. And that encroached my line in the sand. And then I would make an excuse, either for myself or for the person. Ultimately, I had to really get crystal clear as to why was I allowing that line, my own line in the sand, to change. And I had to make some change. I had a choice to make, and I had to make some changes. So that's one thing. And it doesn't have to be a personal situation. Mine, in this instance, was, I can tell you a million from a professional situation as well. So that's one way that you can put this to action. Another is to ask yourself, is there a scenario or a situation in your life where someone you know is not acting in integrity? So it doesn't necessarily have to be about you. If so, is there an action that you can take to address the situation so that you're keeping your integrity in check? And then the last one is to write down your own definition of what rooting integrity means and share it. Share this with people. People have a very different definition. So if you ask 5 people, you're going to come up with 5 definitions of integrity. Yours is the one that matters to you. So when you're rooting in integrity and you're defining that value and how it's going to help you grow through change, your own definition matters. So I'm curious if you have just a couple of ideas. If you want to put it in the chat, how would you define integrity? What does integrity mean to each of you? So feel free to plop that in the chat if you're willing to share. What does integrity mean to you? And for me, it means being honest. So Hannah's saying the ability to be honest with yourself and others, great. Acting aligned, the strength to adhere to morals. It changes how you feel. It's being true to yourself. Absolutely. Do you notice that these are all different definitions? The key here is that rooting in integrity means that you have to define what it means to you. So that's the first step. And then share that with other people. Actively trying to be better. Yes, 100%. It's all of these things and then some. This for me, integrity, rooting in integrity is very important. And I'm just going to share a 2-second story because I'm watching our time. And that is, I left a very influential senior executive position from an organization because it didn't align with the integrity, my definition of integrity. And so there may be times in your life, or there may have already been times in your life where integrity and making that choice might mean a big change. And for me, it meant leaving a big job. And it was 1,000,000% the right thing to do as I was rooting in integrity. Right? And I'm seeing through the chat more definitions come through, and I'm loving all of them. The way others can rely on you, actively being better, true to yourself, and there were a few more. So awesome. Now, as we wrap up integrity, we're going to talk about one that I currently practice all of the time, every single minute of every single day. And before we dive into it, we're going to go over to our last poll. And it's a really simple question. Last poll, do you struggle with perfectionism? Now, we just ended integrity, so I would ask that you're honest with the answer. Do you struggle with perfectionism? I know for myself, the answer is yes. So go over to the polls and answer the question, do you struggle with perfectionism? Okay. We have most of the votes are saying yes. We have one with no, and I would say right on, awesome job. Okay. The last value or root that we are going to dive into is progress versus perfection. Another one of my favorite quotes you will find that it is necessary to let things go, simply for the reason that they are heavy. Perfectionism can be heavy. So we're going to dive into progress versus perfection. So when we are making progress versus rooting ourselves in perfection, some of the big areas that I often coach through with people is that perfection stops movement. Oftentimes, if it doesn't fully, completely stop it, it slows it down. And I'm seeing in the chat that perfection was worse for people in the past and less so now. And I'm like, yes, right on for that. It is awesome to see these comments. So thank you for those. I like to think of perfection as a unicorn. I mean, I've never seen one. I've never seen a unicorn. I don't know that a unicorn exists. Pretty sure it doesn't. And neither does perfection. So just like a unicorn does not exist, perfection does not exist. So perfection, therefore, is a unicorn. Even by the definition alone, what I deem as perfect, those of you who are on the webinar might not. So every single person's definition of perfection is different, and the subjectivity of that in and of itself makes the notion of perfectionism imperfect. Oftentimes, people will think about perfection versus a failure, right? They'll say if it's not perfect, it's a failure. And I would offer that failure brings growth. Failure and challenge is incremental and brings us growth over time. And that is really what, when we think about my company, Center Branch, and the folks that I coach, we are all about growing great leaders, which means we're not seeking perfection. We're going to get it wrong. And those failures or those opportunities are going to help us grow. The last key point of progress versus perfection, making progress versus perfection, is that good is, well, good. The definition of good is good. Somewhere along the line in society, we've come to this place where good has a negative connotation. How are you? Oh, good. How are things? They're good. Good is good. Good is good, just by definition alone. And I say good is good because I actually had a failure where I had a very senior person in my organization, one of the organizations that I worked at. I was in a perfection loop, unable to move forward on a project. I thought the project was good, but it wasn't perfect. And I didn't want to turn it in. And this individual said to me, ultimately, Stacy, this is costing you your reputation. Good is good, and it will never be perfect. And that was a very, very difficult message. I'm sharing all of my difficult messages with you, hopefully so that you can learn from them. When he said good is good, I literally had a light bulb moment and thought, yeah, good is good. I need to make progress here. So when we think about putting it to action, think about one area in your life where perfection has held you back. And it sounds to me like maybe through some of the chat that you're already working on this. Now, based on the poll, we still have some room to grow, right? So what's one area in your life, whether it's a project, a person, a situation, where you've either been slowed down or it has held you back, and what would you do differently? Given the opportunity to shift moving forward, what would you do differently? The other thing I would offer here is that if you make a list of 5 recent failures or opportunities, however you want to write them out. What are those 5 opportunities or failures that you've had? And then I want you to cross out the word failure. So I would actually want you to take a sheet of paper or take a note in your phone, title it failures, write out the 5, and then physically go back with your pen, cross out that word failure, and rewrite the words learning experiences, and write down all of the lessons you've gained from those learning experiences. And for a week, make a list of all of the things that you've made progress on, that you've started, that you've accomplished, all of it. By the end of the week, you may not have completed everything perfectly. You probably will not have. Actually, if you do, that's the opposite of the whole exercise. You will not have completed everything perfectly, but you will have a long list of progress. And when you're able to celebrate that progress, that is the win. And that is where you're rooting in progress versus perfection. Now, I will wrap us up with just a few very quick slides. This is an image you can see of an aspen forest in south central Utah, and it's called Pando, P-A-N-D-O. And Pando, this grove of aspen trees, is one of the world's largest organisms, meaning it's combined. So under the soil in Pando, so this grove of aspen trees, all of the roots are linked together. So when you think about Pando, it is one giant, massive organism that looks like individual trees, because every single one of these trees' root systems come together. This is really often how I equate individuals and teams. As an individual, we have a single root, or we have a single tree. We are that tree. As a team, we share a common value system or a common root system. So one of the things that I would offer you is that as you're working in teams, identify what is your team root system or value system that you're all agreeing upon. And then how does that line up with your personal value system and your personal root system? So Pando is inspirational to me in the sense of you have an individual and you have a team, and they're all fully connected. So a couple of closing considerations for you. Change is inevitable. We know that. John Maxwell says that growth, though, is optional. You get to choose. What are you choosing? What you're rooted in is directly going to determine how you grow. So I would encourage you to choose change, to embrace growth, and to get rooted. If you want to know more about me, you can send me a note. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know I took us right up to the top and I didn't leave a lot of time for Q&A. I'm so sorry for that. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. So feel free to reach out to me directly. And if you're interested in the book Get Rooted on Amazon, feel free to take a gander over. Now, are there any questions that you have for me as we wrap up? And Maggie, I'll turn it back over to you at this point as well.
Well, I have to say, I just texted Dakota, which is how I know Stacy, is that she used to work with my partner. And I was like, I need to rework my entire life and existence after this. Because there were so many things that were brought up that I was like, wow, I was like, that's something I really need to work on. So I found this really helpful. So just thank you for giving your time today for that. Sure. Does anybody have any questions before we just let you all go to head over to either our session with Samira, who is a food blogger, or our session with Nancy Wayne about the competence conundrum? I feel like people need like a minute to like digest all of the wisdom that you just dropped on them. They're like, shoot, I have to like think about a lot of things now.
There's a lot to think about, and no worries with no questions. I know I just dumped a lot of information on you, and I thank every single one of you for being here and for, you know, learning a little bit about your root system.
Well, we really appreciate it, and thank you again, truly, Stacy. We will be reaching out to you at the end of the conference again, but we do appreciate you being here. For everyone else, if you want to head over to one of the other sessions, we do have 2 really great sessions that are happening right now. And we look forward to seeing you for the rest of the day. So stick around.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacy.
Mm-hmm.